This one, we're going to be going live with Django and Heroku. Django, of course, is a web framework written in Python, and Heroku is a web hosting service that uses Git and makes it a lot easier to deploy, make changes, deploy again, and do all sorts of things. We actually run codingforentrepreneurs.com on Heroku. This is not a paid endorsement by any means. If you are Heroku and you're watching this, please, we would love a sponsorship from you guys so we can make more videos like this. But more specifically, this is made to be useful for you. I want to show you guys how to get your project going and live so it's out there, it's out in the wild, and it's actually working. So to do this, we're going to be using this guide right here. So go to that URL, check it out. This is going to be updated as we get feedback from you guys. So you must be at least a logged in user to comment, but make comments there if there are changes or things you see wrong with this. Now, first and foremost, you're going to want to do the first 3 setup items to ensure that you're at where we are now. First off is a Heroku ready blank Django project. What that really means is a settings configuration where it's in its own folder, as in its own module, and you have 3 different setting modules along with this init file here. In this case, we have it commented out, but basically you want to make sure that you have a base file that has this stuff and a production file that has this stuff. Now, that stuff is the SSL and TLS stuff where you'd set it up in this guide. Now, the reason this init is basically, if I uncomment this out, I now have the ability to use my production file as default. And then depending on what system you're on, you're going to use that local file. So if I go live, I'm not going to have that local file. And that's something we'll actually show you to do. That's actually not on this guide, but we will show you how to do it here. Finally, of course, you want to make sure that you have Git set up using either the guide or you can watch it, which goes in junction with this guide. So now let's actually get started. First of all, in our project, we're going to make sure our Git repo exists. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close out a lot of these things and just go in here and go into my project. So I'm going to go into dev and I'm going to cd into try Django 1-11 and I'm going to activate my virtual environment. And then I'm going to go into my source file here and I'm going to run python manage.py run server. I actually want to make sure that there are no issues going on here. So I actually do have some issues, and that's because I'm coming from a place where I only had everything on base.py, but I made some changes to base.py within the project itself. So as you see here, I've installed apps inside a local. I want to make sure that I have those installed apps as well as on production. So this is something you're definitely going to want to do. So if you follow just with that blank project, you're going to want to make sure that you have everything set up that's associated to that given project. So the installed apps. Now, when I do that, my errors go away. That is definitely something you want to make sure is important. There are a lot of errors that might come up when you bring this onto Heroku, but for us, we are now ready to actually go on and make sure our Git repository exists. Now, if I hit Control-C and do Git status, I actually see that it says modified. Well, in this case, this is actually working off of a different GitHub repository. This is working off that live code. So we actually send this code on our GitHub. So we actually don't want to send this code in the same way. That is, we want to make sure that our GitHub repository is in the root of our Django project. That is where manage.py is. So if I did ls.-al, I see Git is not in here. If I cd back and do ls.al, then I actually see Git is right there, as well as the git ignore. So I'm going to change back into my source project here, and I'm going to go off of as if I didn't have a Git repository. So it's going to look something similar to this. So all I do now is do git init, and now if I do git status, it gives me all of these things, right? So it's very similar to what's going on here. Mainly, we've got our Django configuration folder here, or where settings.py is, as well as our manage.py folder, which can be seen here. Movie Picky is where settings is, as well as WSGI. Now, this could also be seen on our code for this particular project, try Django 1.11. We go in and we look at that code. That's all there too. It might be updated a little bit to what's actually on the video, but the main thing here is the code is right. And now I look and I see all of this stuff is in here. Okay, cool. So back into the guide, I have everything pretty much ready to go. We're going to log in, install and log in to Heroku. Now you're going to want to download and install the Heroku command line interface, which if you actually follow along with this guide, you have already done, and you're going to want to make sure you log in. Now, if I actually type out Heroku, I should see something like that, right? That is absolutely what you should see. If you see command not found, that means you didn't install it correctly, and you're going to want to go back and do that. So now I'm going to create a Heroku project, right? So that is what I need to do. I have Git ready, Git status, right? So Git's ready. Now I'm ready to add a Heroku project. So I'm going to do Heroku create, and I'm going to call it Mui-Picky, because that's the name of my Django project. Notice these URLs here, and notice that there's a repo in here. So if I did git remote, I see that I have Heroku in there. So that's showing me that Heroku was installed to my Git repository, or my Git repository, which is having not quite yet, but it has all of these. So my Heroku project's ready. Now what I need to do is create a git ignore and a proc file. Now git ignore is related to Git. It's not related to Heroku. I mean, it's important for Heroku because Heroku uses Git, but it doesn't actually do anything for Heroku. It's all GitHub related. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this command here and just put .py brackets cod into this git ignore. So if I go into my actual project file itself, I'll see that I have a git ignore here, as well as in my virtual environment. Of course, I'm going off of the one that just has .pyc. Now we want to have a better git ignore file. So there's actually a link here that takes you to a better git ignore, which is the master git ignore for the Django project. So this is actually going off of what's in the Django project. In other words, it's going off of this right here. But I'm going to go ahead and add that in, and I save that, and I'll do git status. My status is roughly the same, but now DS store is gone. So if I scroll up a little bit, I see DS store is there, and I no longer see it here. That is good. So that means it's actually being ignored. That means when I do git push or git commit, which we will do in a second, I actually don't have that file going on to the server, which is important because I actually don't want this local file going either, which is shown up in init, right? So I have this init file. The reason this exists is because we only want production working. So that means that I'm going to go back into my git ignore, get the name of my Django configuration folder, wherever local.py is, or more specifically, wherever wsgi.py is, or where your settings were originally. You're going to grab that file, go into the git ignore. So it's that folder, settings, and then local.py. You could also probably just put local.py, or possibly even something like this. Not sure if that will work actually, but this is going to go, this is the path right to where my local settings are. If you had a different project, it'd be something like DJ project or my project or whatever, CFE home. It really depends on what it is. In this case, it's Mui-Picky. That's the name of this project itself. So we're going to go ahead and save that. That actually handles all of the git ignore stuff that we really need to worry about at this time. So the next thing that I want to do is actually echo into my proc file. So I'm going to explain this proc file in just a second. So I go echo web : gunicorn DJ project. So this is not the correct name, right? So that's DJ project. We have Mui-Picky. WSGI is in Mui-Picky, right? So settings, all of that stuff. So we actually are going to go back and change this to being Mui-Picky as one word. Hit enter. And what you'll see in your project is a proc file here. Now this is definitely related to Heroku. So what it's saying is use gunicorn and run our Django project that's listed here, right? So that Django project, the WSGI, actually tells the environment where that Django configurations folder is, right? So this is what it is, right? So Mui-Picky settings, Ooh, what do you know? That looks a lot like this git ignore, except it has a different separator. It's a slash over there and a period here. But this is showing that default Django project. So far, so good. We do git status again. We now see that proc file's on there. You definitely want to see that. You actually don't have to have your SQLite 3 database added. So you could also add that in to your git ignore if you'd like. And you can save that and do git status. And your SQLite 3 database is gone. Okay, so that leads us to provision our database, right? So I'm going to go ahead and provision a database. And this is really a simple command. But this is a free database, so we can just go ahead and add it on. So it's a free hobby dev. That means we're just practicing things out. Database is empty. That's what we want. So good. We now have Heroku's database ready. So that means we need to get our production settings ready for this database. So we come back into our settings for production and we scroll down underneath databases here. This is where I'm going to add in this stuff. And I'm going to paste it underneath here. And this adds in my database, right? So this adds in database related items. So you don't actually have to have this connection age, but that just opens the database a little bit longer. But really, these 3 lines are the important parts of it. And notice that it says databases and then it has a bracket. So you do want to keep this in here. Granted, it's going to replace the things that are in there, but you want to keep at least the Django. Like you could just put it in like this. You don't actually have to have SQLite listed at all. So we'll just leave it like that. And then another couple things that you'll see in here is debug being false and allowed hosts. So if I scroll to the top of this, I actually already have debug being false, but I don't have any allowed hosts. So going back into my terminal, if I scroll up into when I created the Heroku project, I see this URL here. This is actually the URL where our app's going to live by default. We don't have our custom domain yet, so we're going to just add that one in. Now, if you did have a custom domain, you would put it here. So .muipicky.com. So that's our custom domain. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now I have my production settings pretty much ready to go specifically for Heroku. Let's just double check everything. Number 1, debug is false. Number 2, we have our allowed hosts on there. We want to make sure that they're there. And if we had a custom domain, including subdomains, this is what it's going to look like. Without subdomains, you just get rid of it or you write out the actual subdomain itself. So, and then I scroll down a little bit. I want to make sure that my databases are set up. They are. That's looking good. Scroll down even further. I want to make sure that I have all of these SSL and HTTPS related things. Again, this has everything to do with Heroku app. Our own custom domain name might not have SSL. So if it doesn't, then you're going to want to get rid of those settings. So we scroll down a little bit, and now we're seeing use Heroku environment variables for Django keys. Now, in here, this is a secret key, right? We don't actually want this everywhere. Now, of course, ours is a practice one. We're not actually using this. This is not a real service or a real environment key. So we can share this, but yours, you're going to want to keep it nice and secret. That is, if I'm going to put this on GitHub as well as have it as a production project, I'm going to want to make sure that this is hidden. I'm going to do that by adding it in as an environment variable to Heroku. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this real quick. And we're going to do Heroku config set secret key. This is our own custom environment variable that we put. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste it in. But I'm going to change a couple things here and hit enter. Oh, looks like it won't allow it as that. So let's put it in as a string. So put a double quotes on both sides of it. So quote 1. And that's probably because of just how the command line is. The code should be reflected accordingly. All right, so it's now setting this secret key. And it restarted muipicky. I mean, we haven't sent anything. And we can also do that with our email passwords. We don't actually have any email passwords set up on the production. So I'm going to just go ahead and grab it from my base. And here's some of that email setup. Check out our blog to learn more about email setup. Just do a quick search for email and you'll see different ways of setting things up. So now that we've got this email setup, we also might want to change our password. So again, we're going to do Heroku config and then set, and I'll just say email password equaling to your password, right? So you would set your email password here. Oops. We want to put them right next to each other. So it actually has to have no spaces there. And now we set it. We've got that there. And then again in production, now what we do is we're going to grab those environment variables using something called os.environ.get and email password. So this is going off of the environment variables as we see here. The same thing is true with the secret key. So the secret key, we're actually going to leave a default. So os.environ.get, and we'll put secret key in here again. And then we will leave our old one as the default. Remember, I changed it, so it is actually the default here. So environment, we set environment variables. We gave them our own invariable names, right? So that is our own variable name right there. We could call it something different if we'd like. In fact, we did call it different on this guide itself, but I'm not going to worry about that. You can play around with that as much as you want. So now I'm going to go ahead and scale up my dyno. So I'm just going to do Heroku PS scale web 1. It says it cannot find that process type. So that's a little bit out of order, so we'll come back to that. But we want to make sure our requirements are correct. That is, I want to make sure that I have these things installed, Django, then PostgreSQL, because that's the database I'm using, the database URL, and GUnicorn. I already have them installed, so that's fine. And so what I'm going to do then is add my requirements here. And I'll even commit my requirements and do commit updated requirements. There we go. And now we are ready to actually push. But before I actually push finally to Heroku, I will disable collect static. So I'm disabling collect static. So by default, Heroku will run Python manage.py collect static. And I'm actually getting rid of it because I want you to use S3 for static files. Heroku says it too. We have a guide right there on how you can set it up. But let's go ahead and do our commit now. I'm going to do git add -- all. Oops. Let's close this out. Git add -- all. Git commit. Initial commit. Notice it commits everything there. And then we'll do git push Heroku master. This is how you're going to actually always run your commit. So you do git add and then add whatever you're going to want to commit, and then write a message and then push it to Heroku. Heroku is going to push it. Here's a few things that are to note. Python app detected, installing Python 3.6.1. It does that by default now, as far as I know. It installs pip, and then it goes through and installs all of the requirements that we put in our requirements.txt file. So we see Django's there, Pillow, some other things are in there by default. And then it discovering process types, proc file declares types web. So this is all coming from the proc file. That's where that is. That's how it was able to figure this out. Of course, they have some other like smart things in there, and it's actually working off of that as well. All right, so now we've got that. We've disabled it. Now I can run my migrations. So I'm going to go ahead and do Heroku run Python manage.py migrate. So this is going to create my database. It's going to migrate my database with my Django project. Of course, if you make any changes to Django, what you're going to want to do is save those changes and then run them inside of Django. Notice I have this key error default. That is actually good that showed up. I wanted to show you that, hey, maybe we actually should just keep this in here because it's looking for that key. I took it off. So I made some changes. I'll do git add, or well, let's first off do git status, git add, and then I'll add this production file here, do git commit, update production database, and then git push Heroku master. And since it's going to be pushing, it shouldn't go as long this time because it wasn't that initial push. It's going to go less time. So it's not going to have to install everything all over again. It will detect things, but it will go off of any cache that it's already had. See, it didn't actually do it. And if you had collect static on, which I don't recommend, but if you did have it on, it would actually collect the static files also during this process. If you did have it on and you didn't have your static files set up correctly, it would run some errors. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and run Heroku run python-manage.py migrate again. This time it should actually run our database because there should be no errors now. And I'm going to also mention that errors are some other common sort of things that you might end up doing. Notice I ran all of those migrations. Hopefully it actually went off of the database because it doesn't look like it did. It looks like it just went off of something different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up and I want to make sure that I actually have my database in there. So I'm going to do Heroku config. And we have our database URL. It is in there. So I want to make sure also that my production file is correct. I'm going to comment out this, comment out that, git status, git add -- all, git commit, testing production settings module, git push Heroku master. So again, this is just making sure that only my production file is working. So that's the one that it's going to be coming off of because my database says that it was already migrated. It said it already ran those migrations. Like it didn't create the migrations from scratch. And this could be because we deleted our database.SQLite. That might be why, or I should say not deleted, but it's not actually on our server. So let's go ahead and do Heroku run python-manage.py migrate. So what we want to see is that it's creating these tables and it's creating them on our Django project itself. And that's what we actually wanted to see right there. So for some reason, it wasn't actually doing that. So bringing it back in, it might because local.py was actually included in our git ignore. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it back in. But this time I'm going to change the name to it to being local2. Rename this as local2. Close that out. And then we'll do git status. Local2 is on here, right? Now it says it's deleted that. So it actually was in Git. So local was there. That's why it didn't actually run it. So back into our git ignore here. We have some issues with our git ignore here. There's our issues. It wasn't actually ignoring all the files we wanted it to. So we do git status again. Local is still there, but I'm going to bring in local2 now. Git status. Now it's back. Init is going to be fine. Notice that it's saying deleted local, but local2 went away. So I'll do git add -- all, git commit, updated, git ignore, and git push Heroku master. And now we should say with fairly certain confidence that it's not using SQLite database. It's going to be using the Heroku database. And then I'm also going to run some commands to ensure this because our local database actually has some items in it. While that's running, I'll go ahead and open it up to prove it to you guys. So cd try Django 111 source bin /activate cd source python-manage.py run server. And on that server, we're going to go into it. Oops. Let's go to the local server here. Template does not exist. So we have a template error related to our directories. So we don't actually have the templates set up there. We have it in base. So that's going to have to be updated. Okay. And also in production, we're going to have to do it there too, because there will be errors. Good. Save it. Now we refresh. This is local. See that it has some stuff in here. And even if I wasn't logged in, I probably wouldn't be able to see that, but I also won't be able to log in because I haven't created a super user just yet. So I made those changes. I do git status, git add -- all, git commit, update production, templates, location, git push Heroku master, and it's going to run that Heroku push. I'll let it do that for a moment. Okay, it's pushed, so I'll do Heroku open to see this project. It's loading, and hopefully we're not going to see any errors here. there it is. There are no errors. Let's go ahead and try to log in. And it's likely that this doesn't work. So I don't actually remember that user's password locally. So I'll just do Heroku run bash to show you how that works. So Heroku bash is the shell, kind of like the Linux shell on Heroku. So this bash is actually going to work like Linux. So if you're on Windows, you're going to have to use that convention like ls. So we're going to do python manage.py, and we'll create super user. And I'll give the username jmitchell3. Here's also another example as to it's not local, because that is not my local username. To contrast that, python manage.py, create super user. It gives me a different sort of username setup, right? So jmitchell3, I'm going to leave the email address. This is where you're going to want to have a good password. Okay, so key user 2, we have probably a little bit of issues. We definitely have some issues on this code in particular. So let's go ahead and fix those issues. Sorry for those of you who are following along and not using our Django project that we worked on, or try Django 1.11, but we want to actually update this. So I'm going to exit that out. I think the admin should still work for this user, so let's go ahead and try it, because this is a post-save signal. And it did. Okay, cool. So it's actually still working. There was just a little bit of code error as far as the post-save signal receiver for this particular project, but I can now log in. I can add items. So in this case, I'm just going to add some items that we were using as an example to show you that, yeah, the database is actually saving these items. I go into the admin, and I should only see those items in there. So inside of items, click on that. Oh wait, actually we did restaurants. So inside of restaurant locations, we see that there's a restaurant location here. Now you might be wondering why the styles aren't there, or why Django admin looks different. And that's because I didn't actually set up the S3 files as recommended right here. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show you is actually jumping into Heroku and show you where the configuration file, or where the configuration is. So you're going to jump into your app. In my case, it's Muy Picky. We're going to go into settings here, reveal configuration variables, and here we are. So I can actually change these things. So let's change this to something different. I'll go in here and edit it out. I'll hit save changes. Now I can actually edit my password and say new password or whatever. I'll hit save changes. And that is now set up as my Heroku project or Heroku app. All I have to do is restart it. So we do Heroku restart, and that will actually restart my dynos. And I'll also add those changes into my project. Removed issues, git push Heroku master. And one thing I will also mention, since we are now in production and we have debug being false, by default, Django will send your emails or send you emails to your admin. So the errors or the issues that happen. So when we saw that issue happen when we were trying to save that user or create that super user, if I scroll up, when we saw this, that will actually be emailed to you too, even though we did it inside of Heroku. Okay, so I know it's a lot, and I realized that there were some issues and errors when coming through. Do realize this happens, and I do really encourage you guys, so everyone can gain, either comment here on our guide itself or comment on the video below so that other people can actually get some information from this, so we can all launch our projects better, and also make sure that this guide is as best as it possibly can be, because I've noticed some issues with the Heroku guide itself. One of the big ones being, and hopefully they'll change that by the time this is out, but one of the big ones being that it still says syncdb, and that is a very old version of Django instead of using migrate. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you for going through this whole process. I know it was long, but once you get this down, you can actually have your projects out there and live, much like I do. So if you want to stick around, I'm actually going to show you how to put a custom domain on here as well as SSL. So to do this, we first off have to understand that this is going to be paid. You have to be a paid user to actually have your automated certificate. That's that automated SSL. And it's using something called Let's Encrypt. So to do this, I'm going to just upgrade my service from the hobby or the dev hobby to just hobby. I'm going to go ahead and resize it. So this is going to do that. If I can't actually resize it, then I will have to, upgrade locally or on Heroku itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that and say configure dynos here. And we're going to upgrade this from our hobby or from free to hobby. I'll hit save. Once it's doing this $7 a month thing, then I can actually use their automated certificate stuff. So to add our domain name, we'll just do Heroku domains add. And in my case, it's www.muipicky.com. And it's adding that domain name. So it's going to take just a moment. And while it's doing that, I'm going to log into my account. So I'm now on my account for muipicky.com and my DNS records. And it's also added to Heroku's DNS. And all we have to do is point the DNS target to this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, put my answer here, www, type CNAME, hit add record. I'm going to add some URL forwarding. I'm going to use an empty domain name and do www.muipicky.com. That means if I don't have a subdomain, it's going to just re-forward it to muipicky. So I've got my DNS records there. All that stuff's looking good. I can go ahead and run Heroku domains, muipicky. Done, no problem. Go back into our certificate portion. And then we're just going to go ahead and do Heroku Certs auto enable. So of course you have to have a custom domain to make sure that this is working. And we can check our status on these certificates by doing auto. Notice it has my domain name here. It's in progress right now. So I'm going to let it wait for a second. And some domains are failing. Please verify your DNS matches the Heroku domains. So it's possible that this is not saved correctly. So let's go ahead and make sure that we check that again. So the Heroku domains, it's possible that also the SSL is different. And yep, sure enough, it is. So it should be pointed at this. So let's go back in to our domain names. We'll hit edit here and it's www. And instead of that, we'll do .Heroku SSL. We'll hit update. Let's see if it's working now. It might take a second for it to actually be correct. Now it's no longer failing, so it's back into progress. And we'll come back in just a moment to check it. All right, so it's still in progress, but I actually changed it back to Heroku DNS like it said initially. Again, going back and forth on checking these things out. And I'm just going to try to go to muipicky.com. And it should redirect me. It does redirect me. It's saying it can't provide a secure connection. So it's the certificate's still not there yet. But do note that muipicky.com is on my production.py. Otherwise, it will definitely not work. So going back, checking the certificates, still saying that it's failing. So it might take some time for this to actually propagate. So the DNS servers to propagate correctly. Otherwise, you'll constantly have these problems. And again, Heroku domains, if we run Heroku domains, we'll see the Heroku domain is this right here. And that's what we have. So muipicky is going here. And let's try it again. Certs auto, still in progress. So it's going back and forth and checking. It looks like it's not fully there yet, but it should be very, very soon. So we'll come back and check it. And I also just decided I was going to go ahead and test the other subdomain. So I got rid of that URL forwarding and I just put the root domain there without a subdomain. Also added it. So basically I did Heroku domains add just without the www dot. and then I added Certs Auto, and then it's back to testing and not testing. After reading further, it says it takes 45 to 60 minutes. So we'll actually come back to ensure that this is working correctly after that time has elapsed. Hopefully it will be. It should be, because I've done this many, many times, that it now absolutely does work this way. So if it doesn't, then we would basically just have to contact Heroku and make sure that their side of things is working, because this is definitely the process that they said, and we're really going off of their automated certificate management stuff as it fits. So that's a little bit of a bonus for you guys. And again, we'll come back and take a look. Okay, so now it's only a few minutes later, actually. It didn't take 45 to 60 minutes, but I think they say that because people like me get antsy to make sure it's done. It's now saying DNS verified. So what that means is if I click enter here, it actually should give me my site. It is not currently, so there we go. It is now working. So mooeypiggy.com is on HTTPS. So this is actually what we end up building, right? But what you're going to actually see in the walkthrough, and probably you've already seen if you've watched Try Django 1.11, is a more styled version of it, which all of that code, of course, is available on our GitHub, and that is github.com, or just join cfe.com/GitHub. That will get you there much, much faster. So hopefully this guide was really useful for you, and thanks so much for watching the whole thing, or the parts that you really needed. I hope to see you guys again in the near future. And don't forget to subscribe. joincfe.com/YouTube. That's joincfe.com/YouTube. That is where you're going to want to subscribe. That will take you right into our channel, and you're going to want to go ahead and click subscribe and that little bell so you make sure that you get all of our new stuff. See you soon.